chips on the table and cards in hand, Jin-gu thinks that he has already won the match. His opponent loosens his collar, sweating, as Jin-gu hopes he takes the bait, and he goes all in following Jin-gu. Murmur starts in the crowd, surrounding 3 billion won. Winner takes all bet. Some wonder if Jin-gu was nervous, but he already knew he had the winning hand as he could see the opponent's card. He had gotten this ability suddenly in his high school time, but the ability could only see through 5mm material, so it wasn't that special. During the small friend group, he uses his powers to win a game, using it to get a kiss from a girl he likes, which grows into having an intimate relationship. After a long time of relationship, she asks to break up, saying she doesn't like poor people. So he decides to become rich using the ability. It took him 6 months to reach table worth 3 billion, and as long as he won the final bet he could repay his debt and still walk away with 2.8 billion. The crowd tells them to flip the card. The opponent asks if Jin-gu has a pair of lights, which is the highest possible cards, showing his cards to be pairs of 10. Jin-gu is stunned looking at that and flips his cards to find 9 pairs, losing the game. He is confused if he is also a psychic and grabs his collar, saying the pair of 10 was his. The opponent just scoffs, asking if he meant he had switched the card or something. Jin-gu said he had and asked how he did. The crowd is silent for a few moments and begins laughing, not believing him while also mocking him. The guard grabs his shoulder, saying not to make trouble as the opponent walks away. A guy walks back from the crowd and calls. The caller listens to the report and tells him to bring in Jin-gu. Jin-gu is on his knees with the creditor and his lackey around him. He says he will pay back, but the boss doesn't really believe he can, and says it would be better if he just offered his organs, which scares him. He says that even taking his kidneys would be enough, and Jin-gu bows his head, asking for a chance. The boss says he had lost 3 billion in 1 round, and if he had just walked away, he could have paid back and walk away with a decent amount. He says that gambler end up in debt because they lost the last round. He says that he had seen people like him before who get confidence due to their trick and ends up losing it all in one go. Jin-gu says he didn't use any trick and can still win. Boss, fed up with it, tries to scold him, but one of his men whispers something in the boss's ear. The boss asks if can read minds or something, but Jin-gu denies it. He says he made 10 times the money borrowed in 6 months and doubled 500 million in 3 hours, and had only lost to the opponent's trick, saying this was proof that he had a sure method of winning money. He asks for 3 months. The boss isn't convinced and asks the guy beside him if he was actually that good. The guy looks at him and says that he is the type to pretend to be bad to reliably win money. Boss says how he can gamble with no money, and Jin-gu asks for 50 million, making the boss laughs, calling him a retard. The boss begins to calculate the money he would owe him by the end of the time limit, and gets 400 million, and Jin-gu confidently says he will do it. He says he will test him first with the guy he was with, gives 10k each, and if he wins, he will give it to him, but if he loses, they will cut him. The match begins, but he keeps getting low hands, so he folds. He finally sees a chance and starts betting. They both show cards and he wins. Next round he gets good cards and thinks of ending it that round, and begins to bet. The guy looks at his card and calls. They both show their hand. Jin-gu wins, but the card the guy shows is different from what he saw from X-ray vision, and is confused how it happened. The boss asks if he lost on purpose and tells his boss that he thought Jin-gu was bluffing. The boss gives him his clothes and bag of money. As he gets dressed, the guy calls and asks if his loss to the opponent trick. Why hadn't he learned his lesson and toss him the card he saw with his X-ray vision? He says that every place has its trick, and if he didn't play smart, he would lose. Jin-gu realizes if he had changed the other card he would have gotten paired and won. He says this wouldn't happen again and walks, saying him to go to Anseong, and they should still have few big tables. Outside, he takes out his cigarette, trembling, and falls, wondering if he knew what he did. He looks at the money and thinks he will make 400 million at least, and thinks of the place he was told to go to. He begins gambling. He looks at his card and calculates that if he won that hand, he would win 5 million, and with the hand he lost on purpose, that would make it around 2 million. He calls, and the fat guy is angry, showing 2 pairs, and the old-looking guy shows 4 pairs, saying he won. The girl asks Jin-gu for his card, and he shows 5 pair, winning the round. After he leaves the players at the table and begins to talk with each other, the old guy says that Jin-gu bets like a beginner, but he can read cards pretty well. The lady wonders if he is cheating, but the old guy denies, and fat guy wonders why he would come here. The lady thinks as if he could win all his money, and the old guy say he will lose a bit first, then take it all. In the restroom, he thinks the rate at which he was earning isn't good enough, and he needs to find somewhere bigger to make another 350 million. As he walks out of the establishment, he notices the girl, and he calls out to her. He asks to wait, and she cries on his chest. He hugs her, but she shoves him away, wiping her tears, goes for a smooch, which turns into intimate quickly when he suddenly wakes up. He visits the place again the next day when the old guy calls for him and introduces Park, who will be replacing the lady, when the fat guy says to get started. After a few rounds, and he looks around, sees he has a winning hand when Park gives up his card. They begin betting. Seeing others betting even with a low hand, he wonders if they are trying to switch cards and rechecks their card. He thinks he shouldn't back out and scare them by betting big, and he could win about 100 million. He tries to calm down and realizes that they knew how much he had and wanted to take everything he had. The old guy taunts him and decides to go with it and dumps 30 million calls. The fat guy shows the card, and the old guy asks for Jin-gu's hand. He says it was 9, which he is not impressed with, and show 5 pair. He tells him to stop immediately as he starts checking the cards. The old guy grabs his collar and asks if he thought he was cheating, but Jin-gu just smacks it away and keeps checking, but finds nothing. He slams the table in a rage, and the old guy kicks him in rage and begins smacking him. Afterward, he sits outside with very little cash and wonders if he should just die when Park calls him for a talk. Park sits beside him and says he wants to talk as they both lost money. Jin-gu tries to walk off, but Park shows a card and asks him to guess what that card is. And if he guesses right, he will give him all the money he lost back. Jin-gu grabs his collar in rage and threatens him, but he asks again calmly, as he has nothing to lose anyway. He pushes him back, clicking his tongue, and uses his power. He calls 3 light, but Park shows it is a 5. He tries to punch him, but is easily dodged, falling down. He begins whining on the ground, but he realizes that the 3 have turned to 5 when Park calls for stew. Park describes what happened during the match. He just says he got it, that they were pro, and asks why he lost even knowing it. He says he was the one who switched the cards, saying he was the pro, and they had given him 5 million for that. He trembles as he suppresses his rage and asks why he was telling him this. Park simply replies he needs him, which confuses him. He calls him dumb, but starts explaining that he would have done this for a normal person. This plan was made with the assumption that someone could see through the cards. He tries to deny it and play it off, but Park directly tells that he had X-ray vision. He still tries to deny it, but still says he knew he had switched cards, because he could see them. He lets a small laugh and asks if he believed such a thing, and says he does, and says he was tricked by someone like that. But he switched card instead of X-ray vision, reminding him of the guy he lost to. Jin-gu asks if he is planning to sell him out, but Jack denies it as he wants to make a partnership. Jin-gu has power, but no skills, and Park has skills but no power. Jack asks him to be the eyes, as he acts as the brain and makes money. Jin-gu is reluctant, as we already lost even using power, but Jack just says that he should have a reason to hesitate then. He brings up his debt and time limit. Jack gives back the money he lost and says he is bankrupt either way, and didn't had any other money he can get money. He offers to teach. Everything he learned and knew place to become rich, so 400 mil in 3 months was easy. After some thought he agrees, but says the priority is paying off debt, and Park agrees to it, and both of them introduce themselves. Park says that before they start they needed a bodyguard as the guys from before had thugs ready in case things worked out, which surprised Jin-gu, who realized the place was filled with illegal activities. He says he knows a suitable guy and asks to go to Seoul, and Park agrees, saying that where the money is. Manhwa, who is having an intimate moment, gets a call from Jin-gu. He feels like he should take it. He picks it up, and on the other side, Jin-gu offers 10 million per month earning. In a bar, Jin-gu introduces Manhwa and Park to each other. Park isn't sure if Manhwa is good until Jin-gu sends a video of his fight. He turns pale, looking at the video, and looks at Manhwa, who has a grin on his face. He tries to ask for details of the plan, and Jin-gu confesses his power. He doesn't believe it at first, but after Jin-gu tells him to test out his power and shows the result, is amazed. In the lavender room, the boss who was with Sohwa is checking the new employees and finds one of them has slash marks in the hand, but doesn't ask for details, telling everyone to get out, as he tells one of the employees to send them to her room. She asks for the girl slashed in the wrist, who replies Hong Na Zhong. Hearing Jin-gu's story, he asks how much time was left, and Jin-gu replies. After thinking for a bit, he agrees. Jin-gu says he can't be upfront, but Sunghwa says it was fine. Park tries to start a plan but is interpreted by Sunghwa saying Jin-gu as the boss should be doing the planning. He said Jin-gu might be the boss, but he was the investor and strategist, so he follows him if wants to be paid. He said their first goal is to make 200 million by playing in smaller venues. Sunghwa asks, why couldn't they just go to big and get it in one go? Park tells he needs to bait them, for which they would at least need 200 million. Sunghwa asks why he could just make 50 million to 400 million in one go, and Park says once someone makes 4 to 5 times the starting amount, the place starts to suspect them, and if they doubt them, it would be over for them. He says that nobody make more than 3 times of their starting amount, and Sunghwa understands. He asks if they going back to the place they played till now, but Park says they will go to Siru and play Heartbreaker Queen HQ, and asks if Jin-gu has ever played it before. He says he has but felt like it was good for making money, but Park denies, saying it was the perfect game for him and one of the most popular games in a big house of Gangnam. Sunghwa says, as if it really matters, as Jin-gu's ability would make him unbeatable. And the Park says that he was in this situation because he thought the same. He said that in an amateur game, the one with more money usually wins. But if someone who is unusually lucky wins even with money, but it only applies for the amateur games. But with a master's skill, a normal person has no chance of winning. Park says Jin-gu's ability was good, but he still lost. Sunghwa realized it was because he was unskilled, and asked what kind of skills he needed, and Park replied betting skills. He tells the master knows the opponent's card without sleight of hand or psychic abilities, and being able to hide that was a skill, just like being able to make a bet, even when they know his hand. Once he learns how to do it, he will make obscene amounts of money. Sunghwa stands up, asking them to go for a second round of drinks, and Park agrees. He calls the girl and asks for services, and she says she will get it ready. Na Zhong arrives, and the boss gets ready to have a talk with her. In the game, each player gets 2 cards, and the player with the lower sum wins. The ace was worth 1, while all the face cards were worth 11. He started explaining the penalties, saying 2 aces of hearts were counted as 0. And if they won with that hand, they had to pay 5 times the amount unless the opponent said die, before revealing and cancelling the penalty. But if they lost with ace of heart, they had to pay the bet amount only. He then explained the ace of hearts lost to the queens, and that if they got one of them, they would win against the ace of hearts regardless of the total gaining its name, and the penalty for losing with an ace to the queen was 10 times the amount. The way to win against the queen was to have 2 aces of heart, and the win might get them 20 to 100 times the amount depending on the place they play at, but the chances were very low. So the Park tells them to aim for 5 to 10 only. After having a drink, they return home, and Jin-gu wonders if the guy he lost was a psychic, or was just confused, then just lets that thought go and wonders if he met him again, and if could he win. Then he wonders if other psychics appear as well, but lets those thoughts go with the hope of repaying debt first. The next day they meet outside place, and Park gives some cash to Sunghwa to spend, and tells him to act like he is there to have fun. Inside they go their separate ways with their chips. He sits down with a guy in a white shirt as he waits for the cards. He gets an ace of heart in the very first round, then checks the opponent's card, and they both start betting. Jin-gu is calm the whole betting moment, but his opponent is getting nervous. The opponent peeks at his hand again and glances at Jin-gu, who is calm. He throws his final bet and calls. Jin-gu shows he had 3 and his opponent admits his loss and pays the penalty with an angry face. After a few rounds, he gets 2 kings and remembers if a king was with an ace or other number, they counted as 1. But if it was with jack or a queen, it was counted as 11. But if they had 2 kings, it was counted as 1. He checks the opponent's card and sees he has an ace of heart and 2, which was a very good hand. The opponent was trying to suppress his excitement, but failing. they both being raising big amounts. The opponent calls at 1 million and Jin-gu answer. With raise of 2 million, the opponent goes all in as ask to show the cards and Jin-gu shows 2 kings winning and collects the winning. The opponent grabs his collar as he dies every ace of here, but he suddenly gets 2 kings. Jin-gu says that his face gave it away and tells him to not gamble if he can put on a poker face. He tries to punch him, but is stopped by Manhwa, who holds him down till the guard comes. Out in a shop, Park berates Jin-gu for going overboard, saying they can't go there anymore, but Jin-gu simply says he wanted to see how well he would do, and it was a lucky day. Park asks how much he won, and he says 30 million. Park tells him to lose a bit as well so that they don't run out of place to go. Park asks Sungwei how much he owns, and he says 5 mil, surprising both of them. He asks if he did something wrong, and Jin-gu asks if was a genius. But Sungwoo denies it. He simply says he felt good, and had good hands. Park laughs, saying he might end up being pro with his instinct. But he say he will pass. Jin-gu asks if this is it, but Park says they would be going to Hwajidong next. They hits up the next area and start gambling. Some try to run away, but they capture them, gambling, drinking in the lavender room, enjoying services, and counting money. In just 2 weeks, they have won over 200 million. Jin-gu says he didn't get as many penalties as he thought, and Park says he was still amateur, as he still can't trick his opponent, even if he can see their cards. But the haul was still impressive for 2 weeks, as he talked about his past where he turned 50 mil to 500 mil in 6 months, but ends up losing it all in one go. Then the talk goes to Songhwa, who made 10 million without any psychic ability. Jin-gu asks for the tip, and he says he was just naturally good at these things. Park offers to teach some techniques, but he denies, saying he didn't want to be a gambling addict. Jin-gu asks if they should hit big tables now, and Park agrees, saying they will go to Jonggro, which has a gambling house with a history. He says he is close with the owner and might get easy victim if they pay some side money. Songhwa asks for a plan, and Park says to go there with 500 mils. When an employee brings in a few girls, as Park is kidding around with the employee, Jin-gu notices Na-young. They go to the room next door and start talking. She denies being her, saying she is her twin sister, but he doesn't believe it. She tries to walk away when he grabs her wrist to notice slash marks. He asks what happened. He questions her, but she just walks away, telling him to enjoy his time. They just stare as Park and the owner hug. Park introduces the owner, who takes them to the place. As they are walking, Songhwa asks Jin-gu if he knows the woman, but is silent. He tries to ask one again, but he just pats him on the shoulder, then saying they can talk after some rounds. They exchange their cash, and as Jin-gu is searching, a guy with glasses calls him for a round, which he agrees to. He holds the card and puts it the equipment. They start a game, and he sees that he has 5, while the opponent has 6. He thinks of letting him have this match, but the opponent gives up easily, which stuns him. Park in the office asks who was going to be easy and will pay the fee for the answer. Choi says he didn't have to and begins to list them out. He shows a guy who had gotten a crap load of money when his father hit the sack. A fat guy who had owned multiple properties all over the place, but had a temper making it hard to take money. Park asks for the person with whom taking 300 miles wouldn't be a problem. The owner tries to show, but notices Jin-gu was already playing with him. He calls him a dumb who always loses, but doesn't complain because he was a college professor. On the table, after multiple rounds, he notices that he could read his hand, but he is sure he isn't using any technique, and wonders if he was using a camera. He plays few more rounds to understand. Next round, he gets 2 aces, but sees queen in the opponent's hand, and gives up. In a separate room, a girl who could see all the cards finds it weird that he had given up without even betting. She wonders if he knows what is going on, but rejects the idea, as any normal person would flip the table over if that happened. Jin-gu stands off, saying he needs to go to the restroom, and calls Park as he is walking away. In the restroom, he says that his card was being read. He says he lost the first few rounds so that he wouldn't suspect him, and he never raised when he had a lower hand, but Park finds it weird, as Choi had said he was bad at gambling. Jin-gu says he thinks it is a camera, but Park doesn't believe it. Jin-gu looks around and whispers that he could see his hand before he even turns his card. Park as if he, but Jin-gu cuts him off, saying he is, as he didn't even look at his hand, but he kept touching his ear. The Park says he will take a look, and they return to the table together. He says that Jin-gu is his brother, but he has already lost his money and asks permission to watch the game. The professor says yes and starts playing the game. They start playing a few rounds. Jin-gu gives up one round easily, and he berates him for not raising. Hearing their interaction, the professor just smirk, noticing that he tells Jin-gu to end the game and walks off. Before Jin-gu leaves, he asks if the professor will be there tomorrow, and he says yes with a smile. Outside Park confirms that it was a table camera, and someone outside was telling him through earphone. He says it couldn't be installed secretly, and Jin-gu asks if Choi was in it, but Park denies it, and he will have a chat with him tomorrow. Manhwa objects, saying they might be working together, but Park denies it. Jin-gu agrees to not tell him, as it would be hard to prove, and he could tell him about his power. Giving up, he tells him to go someplace else, saying that the professor might have backing, being able to do such a thing in someone else's place. Jin-gu says he wants to beat him, as he is pissed off. Park laughs and says if they both knew each other hand, all they could do was break even. Jin-gu says, as long as he can distract him for a moment, he could win. As long as they were confident that they will win, they would keep betting just like he used to. So he would aim for that, and win for sure. In the room with the girl, the professor scolds her as he hadn't won any money in the 2 hours they had played. She says that she had told him the card correctly, but in a rage grabs her shirt and asks why he keeps giving up, and she said it must be because he could bait him into calling his bets, scaring him off whenever he had a winning bet. The professor smacks her face, saying they were far from making the money they borrowed, and would lose everything if they didn't do well. She pushes him and tells him to play with someone else, saying he might be an expert. The professor just laughs hearing and walks off, telling her to do her work. When he come next day, he walks off after gulping, looking at the girls behind. The girl is sure that Jin-gu has noticed them cheating, but is not sure what he is planning to do again the next day. In the room, Jin-gu gives Manhwa instructions to check something and tells Park to not say anything to Choi, and he agrees. Manhwa stands up to go home, and Jin-gu also walks out, saying he has something to do, telling Park he will be late. While walking, Jin-gu tells Manhwa about Na-jun being the twin sister of his ex-girlfriend, which surprises him. He stops a taxi and goes, saying he has something to take care of. He waits for Na-jung outside the place and takes her to the park to talk. She still denies, but he tells her with confidence he can tell. He begins asking questions and tells her to stop pretending to be someone else. She calls his name, saying it was hard, with tears in her eyes, and he hugs her immediately as she tells him she missed him. They spend intimate time together. Next day, while having breakfast, she tells him her story. Her father had taken his own life, leaving a huge debt for her and her mother, and the people who he borrowed money from were shady, so to protect people around her, she broke up with him and quit school as well. She tried to slit her wrist but couldn't finish it. She tells him to not get involved as the people would sell organs if she couldn't pay back. She said she will work in the same place. Jin-gu offers to help, but she says not see each other again and to pretend to not know each other. Jin-gu meets up with the outside of the place. Inside, he again plays the professor and loses multiple games, even the girl behind the screen, if he didn't suspect anything and was just lucky yesterday. The girl notifies her of the next card and tells him to aim for a penalty. She tells him to go slow and pretend he was thinking hard. The professor thinks about going. He will go slow and finishes the game with him. Jin-gu notices the cards and decides to end everything in one go, pitying him. He glances at Park and stretches, and Park sends a message to Manhwa saying to get ready. They begin betting as the professor tries to slowly raise. The bet reaches 5 mil and the professor waits for him to call it, so that he can earn 22 mil. But the girl is furious, thinking what he would do if he loses, and berates herself for teaming up with him. Jin-gu glances at Park, who gives him the okay, and he calls while raising another 10 mil. The girl is suspicious of things going too well, but the professor calls in for going all in, and Jin-gu also agrees to it. Receiving signal, Manhwa turns off the power and switches it back on after some time. The girl is suspicious of the timing, and the girl is frustrated she can't check the cards as he is holding them. He asks the professor to reveal the cards. The professor checks with a trembling hand and shows a Q and 7 makings. Jin-gu shows he had ace of spade, and 3 of clubs, stunning both the professor and girl. The professor in confusion leaks he heard it was ace of heart, but says it was nothing the moment he is questioned, while the girl could only face palm. He tries to run away, but Manhwa stops him. He tries to shove him off, but he grabs him and notices receiver in his ear, and Park informs Choi and he signals the guards. Sunghwa passes the professor to Jin-gu as he gets ready for a fight, while in the room girl is in a panic. She packs up and looks at the video, not knowing how to leave. In the office, they found a customer camera and a small one in his vest as well. The professor said he only did as he was told, and told the mastermind was in the room next door. Park doesn't believe Choi would be helping them. He apologizes, saying his business wasn't going well, and they had paid him in advance. Park said he could do it to a friend, and Choi brings up a Hong-suk asking if he wasn't a friend. Sanghwa kicks the door open and notices the girl down on the ground unconscious. Choi says if he had gone with him that day, he would have been beaten up as well, or maybe he would have left him behind, but Park is a bit confused. Choi warns Jin-gu, saying he stabs friends in the back. Sunghwa walks in with the girl. The professor smacks the girl, blaming her, and Sunghwa grabs him. In anger, Jin-gu asks if it was just them two, and Professor nod. He tells Sunghwa to let him go. Jack says he will explain everything later, but Choi shouts back that he sold friends so he could live. He apologizes, but Jin-gu says it was fine. Sunghwa asks if the timing was right, and Jin-gu says it was perfect, remembering how he had pulled another card, put his ace of here into the equipment. In that short time, the professor and the girl are thrown, and the professor begins beating the girl in rage, blaming her. Jin-gu kicks him away, threatens him, and walks away, telling her to not do it again. Park said they might have won, but they won't able to enter another gambling house. Jin-gu asks, why? And she said that Choi should have sent photos and information to people he knows, blacklisting them. Sunghwa asks Park for the plans now, and he says they had to prioritize the debt, so they would have to go to ones away from the city. As HQ was played mostly in the city, and they avoid foreigners, it wouldn't be easy. They split up to go home. Jin-gu and Park walk back together. Jin-gu asks Park about what Choi is talking about, and he starts telling the story. 8 years ago, Choi and Hong-seok used to go around and trick amateurs and take money. Choi used to find opponents while he and Hong-seok played the games. One day, they met a son of a CEO and played some matches. He eventually invited them to his office to play some more, and they kept winning. He felt little bad for the poor guy as he sat in despair. As he began to run out of money, they got an unbeatable hand. He was sure what he had, but he kept calling bet. And when everyone went all in, he said he wanted to bet the building and ask if they had anything else to bet, like their lives. Though bet was ridiculous, as they were sure to win, he agreed. But when he flipped his card, they had been switched. He told them both to have a match, and the winner lives with only one of their eyes. He tried his best and beat his friend, killing him. And he survived. Jin-gu says that he had met the same guy, and he thinks someone did it ruin him. And Park confirmed, saying it must be someone he had beaten, as he would have no reason to go to the standard gambling house. He asked if he could win, but the Park say to pray, and that they don't meet. Back in the room as both get ready to sleep, he hears a knock and opens up to find the Hana, who barges in. She sits on the bed and says she has an offer they wouldn't be able to refuse. Jin-gu asked what the offer was, and she said she would join the group, which he rejected immediately. She said she had made the equipment herself, but he said he didn't need cameras as they would be doing it through skill. She questions how he knew that they had a queen in the last game, and asks if he was psychic. She said she thought it was weird how he kept giving up without even looking at his hands, as it would be human nature to confirm cards they have every now and then. But he had given up on checking, meaning he knew it without even looking. He tries to question her suspicion, but she said what happened in the last game wouldn't be possible even for a pro player. So she concluded that he must have psychic power like X-ray vision, and keeps talking with a smug face. He grabs her and tries to throw her out of the room. When she threatens she will tell every person she meets. Jin-gu tells Park to call Sunghwa and asks him to bring rope and handcuff. Sunghwa falls silent upon hearing the call request, but brings those anyway. They bind her, and Sunghwa threatens to punch her if she says anything else. With a smug face, she says that the reaction has confirmed her guess. Jin-gu tries to curse, but Park stops him and asks her what she can offer. She tells what she can do, and tells him they won't be able to go to most gambling place due to Choi. Jin-gu tries to curse again, but she says she can get them to Orvanyu Elv7. She had hacked their server, finding their security surprisingly bad. The system helped them to filter people just by seeing social security number. It maintained secrecy of the gambling house, while letting them find out how right the person is. So with fake ID and face information, they could easily go in. Jin-gu asked why she was doing this, and she said she needed money to pay for school. Park asked how much she needed, and she said she wanted 4 mil a month excluding the deposit, but settled with 3 mil. Jin-gu said they needed to discuss and tells her to go home. Samju gets a fax from Choi, showing Jin-gu a notice of warning. He laughs and asks Woo if they are still following, which is confirmed, then asks the time limit, and Woo replies he has 45 days left. They begin discussing about Hannah. Jin-gu asks how Seonghwa feels about her, and he replies positively. He then asks about stakes in Arvanu, and Park says it was huge, and a couple 100 million changes hands with every game. They begin to discuss, and Park asks if Hannah is joining, but he is still reluctant. He is worried about being scammed, but he also doubts how good she was at her job, as getting caught would be messy. Seonghwa said they could give her a trial run. The next day, he gets a call from Woo and starts talking about the progress. After the call, he stares at the phone. Hannah in the house wonders if he really is a psychic when he gets a call from him. They meet in a cafe and start discussing the work. He asks about her ability, and she confirms, saying forgeries wouldn't be detected by identification devices. After a few more questions, he lets her in the group and begin introducing the people of the group. She stands up, saying she is curious about something, and takes off her jacket and asks if can see what she is wearing under. He is confused, but goes red noticing something. She said she needed about 15 mil to make the fake ID and process she needed to do to get it, and gave him her address, and told him to bring others and come, and she would give the briefing. He agreed and walked out. Back in the room, he said he had met her, and she had given her address, asking them all to come. Park asked if he was going to tell her about his ability, but he wasn't sure. Park asked if they were going immediately, and said yes. Seeing no reason to wait, he said they should keep watch on her, and Seonghwa says to just pack up and stay there. Park and Jin-gu looks at each other, and they all visit the address packed up. Hannah was checking the database when she heard the knocking and opened up to find all of the group packed up. She barged in and settled in while she was still confused with what's going on. She explains again how she would make fake ID to other and why she needed the money. The Park notices the equipment and asks if she's going to use them, and she confirms it. Jin-gu asks what they need to do while waiting, and she says they would need clothes appropriate for the location. She tells them to get some designer brands, as they could get caught if they wear shabby clothes. Seonghwa takes them to meet his girlfriend to discuss cloths. She tells her own story, and then says she got some knockoffs that look same as the original, and slides them the card telling them they would get a discount if they use her name. They look through the catalog, is a surprise to the knockoff. They show off the first cloths they choose to Hannah, who scold them to return them. After a few more days and more appropriate clothes, Hannah gives them the fake ID and explains to them their identity as they finish the final process. Jin-gu was Shin Bumchul, the youngest son of the president of a huge company. The Park was Lee Choljin's right-hand man, Bumchul. And finally, Seonghwa was Kim In-sun, friend of Bumchul. With finally few detail, she tell them to be careful and that she will be in a car back of the hotel. They go their separate ways, leaving Jin-gu and Hannah in the room. After sharing a few drinks, they go their separate ways. They feel relief after they get into the elevator. Jin-gu wears the transmission, and Hannah hears talk from the ride. They enter the place. Jin-gu takes the chip and goes to the biggest table. He sits down as the opponent taunts him, and Jin-gu responds with a smile, not falling for them. They raise the minimum bet to 10 miles and start the game. He begins to analyze the opponent and decides to toy with him, and both keep raising, and he taunts when the opponent looks surprised, who falls for it and drops the chips. The opponent tells him to show the card and curse as he lost the match. After a few more rounds, the opponent keeps getting angry for losing. He keeps taunting him, who still falls for it, calls his employee, and tells him to bring more money. He keeps mocking him, but the opponent has a confident smile. Park and Seonghwa are talking with each other when they hear someone losing 500 million in less than an hour, and the bet is reaching 300 miles already. They both walk to Jin-gu, knowing it is him. The table is surrounded by the onlookers when Park walks in and whispers to him, but he just hands him a chip and tells him to get another beer. The opponent shows ace of here and king with a smirk. Jin-gu isn't impressed and shows he had a queen, giving him the win. He asks the dealer what the penalty was, who tells it was 5.7 vial. The opponent, red in rage, tells the dealer to check Jin-gu, accusing him of cheating. A guard calls the office to tell the situation. They are both called to a room to discuss where the opponent still accusing him of cheating when the director arrives and introduces himself, and the opponent complains to him. The director tells him to behave if he can't pay. He tries to threaten, but he is unfazed. He says even if he sold all his assets he would barely have enough and tells him to sign the contract. The director tries to negotiate with Jin-gu to decrease it to 3 bile instead, which he accepts. He offers to cut off his hand, but Jin-gu says they don't need to go that far. Hearing the director offers to take him to the VIP room, he tries to decline, but Park tells him to accept it, so he agrees if his friends were allowed. He guides them to the room, and as they walk inside, he tells them they can stop acting and take their time. At the table, a lady asks who she is gonna be playing with. Jin-gu sits down to play. The girl suggests, starting with 10 million. Hana, who is listening in, is nervous as they should know the truth. Jin-gu knew the game was going to be against him, but still tried to play along. He knew he had won this round, and he began betting, but it ended soon so he gave up. He understood that she was a careful and calm type, and must be skilled as well. After playing enough to lose suspicion, he decides to go for the big ones only. He notices that she is reading his hands without doing anything fishy, so he eliminates the other possibility, and finally guesses they might have the same ability. He tries to flirt with her with no reaction from her. She asks for a bet, and he bets 10 mile. She is shocked and decides to give up. He is confused at first, but realizing something thinks of testing it out. He declares that he will play without looking, leaving everything to luck, and asks her to try it as well. She refuses calmly. He starts betting with a grin, and she gives up easily. Next round, he peeks at his card when she reminds that he wasn't supposed to. They both begin to raise the bet, and he loses when he calls banging the table in anger. He shouts. He keeps losing when he looks, and decides to go back to not looking as he thinks to lay a bait. He keeps betting without looking, and she keeps easily giving up. He calls her out on giving up easily, and she says if he doesn't look at the cards, it's boring. He says he will keep doing it and eventually win, and decides to keep going. Next round, she calls it out. In a few rounds, she doesn't keep giving up calls every she sees chance. Next round, he gets 2 kings while Suhee gets ace and king of the club. He thinks of baiting her and starts to raise, which she follows. She suddenly raises 100 mile and he calls it raising 200 miles, saying she must have a good hand, and asks if it was ace of hearts and saying he should pray he has a queen. She goes all in and calls, and Jin-gu also calls, going all in of 420 mile. He flips the card and gets 2 kings as his friends are excited. He asks if she had 2 hearts, but she admits defeat. The director walks in and asks what happened. One of the guards says they had lost over 1 bile, and he tells Suhee to explain herself, who refuses to. Jin-gu stands up happy when the director threatens him to sit down and stabs the table. He complies. The director keeps asking her to win back the money, and she says she can't as he keeps playing without looking. He commands her to play again, and Hannah, who is listening to it, glances at her phone. Park tries to play the fake role they were given, but the director says he knows what they are facing. He tells them the only way they can leave is if they leave all the money behind. Jin-gu says he had earned it fair and square. He says that he will let the penalty go and to let them leave. Director laughs at that, calls the guard to take action. Sungwa tries to jump into the action, but is stopped by Jin-gu. He says that he owes money to Samju financially and asks what would happen if they find out they killed him just before he could pay. The director says they wouldn't know, but Jin-gu says he had his men waiting outside. He calls the bluff and signals the guard to attack. Wu walks in with his men. The director asks why he was there, and he asks Jin-gu if he won a lot. He says he did but wasn't allowed to leave. Wu and Huitaek talk with each other as Huitaeki brings up them using fake ID to come in. Wu says even if they used fake IDs, they had won. And if they were going to be like this, then why had he organized this game? He must be sure of his win. Jin-gu interjects, saying he was willing to pay 3 bile for tricking, and just take the money they had won, but Huitaek tells him to shut up. Wu agrees to Jin-gu's suggestion, but Huitaek doesn't agree. He insults Wu and tries to lord over him, but get punched on his face. He tries to get up, sees a gun to his head, after threatening him. He kicks him in the head and tells him to grab the chips and exchange them, and tells the Jin-gu group to follow him. After leaving, he pays off his debt with some extra for saving him during the last situation and thanks them. He asks how he earned 2 bile but lets it go, seeing how reluctant Jin-gu was. After consulting him, he leaves, and Jin-gu and the gang falls on their asses. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.